My name is Adrian, and you have probably heard of a lot of frameworks today. I'm going to teach you how to build your own. We're talking about risk frameworks for large language model-based systems. Now, for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to do a crime, and I'm going to refer to conversational generative AI as AI. I know, terrible. I'm a terrible person. Please forgive me, but I do have some credibility in the field. Over the last year and a half at EIA Finance, we've built a customer support agent called Irie with a 55% resolve rate. It's a RAG-based system with a couple of agents in production. We've obviously got internal automation with Copilot, all sorts of Copilots. And of course, we've got engagement and personalization with natural language processors for spending insights. Basically, as a user, I can log into my credit app and say, how much have I been spending with merchant X in this period of time? The engine understands it and gives you the analytics. And we've got vulnerability management, which is one of my prides. So 95% of potentially vulnerable customers, we're a credit card company, which means that our vulnerable customers are at risk of actually losing credit risk and credit decisioning. They're identified and get support within 24 hours using large language models. So we have deployed very interesting things, but naturally, when you talk about conversational AI, it's really something that's pretty new. So is it risky? Of course it's risky, right? The more you want to innovate, the more you adopt new things, the more risks you take. Being in a heavily regulated industry, we wanted to take a look at how can we innovate with a little bit more safety, because, you know, conversational AI is non-deterministic. You feed it a prompt, but every answer differs from the other. It's a completely novel attack surface. Yes, machine learning has been around since the 1780s, 90s, whatever philosophy you adhere to. But as large language models-based systems enter commercial environments, it is a new attack surface that we don't really know how to regulate because, again, it's non-deterministic. And of course, it's very opaque. It's a black box, right? What are you going to do with how are you going to regulate your output if you don't know what happens from the minute you feed it the input? You'll never find that out, right? So you really need to shoot in the dark. And I'm going to teach you how to shoot in the dark in a relatively compliant way. How risky is it? Risky enough that we have a lot of frameworks available, right? We've got the NIST RMF, which incorporates all sorts of generative AI risks. We've got the OWASP Top 10 Gen AI risk framework. We've got the ISO 31K, and so on and so forth. But obviously, these are traditional, and they're based on deterministic compute systems. They've been around for ages. They have the philosophy in mind. They've been regulating things from the start of cloud computing and before that, and servers and whatnot, right? And sometimes they can be too generic, you know, how to apply a common risk framework to basically anything. Sometimes they can be too specific. Oh my God, agent protocols. And then they're usually quite corporate. So if you're a company of 5 people, you might feel discouraged to think about risk frameworks simply because you want to innovate. Well, I'm going to teach you how to not do that, right? Instead of using a framework, I'm going to teach you how to build the framework. And it's a relatively easy thing to do if you follow a cute little acronym called EDICT. When I think of EDICT, I think of like a king giving an edict over the compliance and risk frameworks that they've got. At EIA Finance, we've introduced this following a mentor of mine. Her name is Nadimeth, and we managed to implement this across all of our systems, in particular to AI. So, E stands for enumerate all your variables in isolation, then define them. What's the inherent risk for all of them? Don't worry, I'm going fast, but I'll take them all one by one, slide by slide. Implement tailored controls for each variable, calculate the residual risk, and then tier your governance. This is it at a glance. You got 2 more seconds to take photos, and here we go. Enumerate. So, when we think about enumerating risks related to AI, conversational AI, we think of the model, Claude, GPT, Gemini, Olama, whatever you use, right? The model runs on something. Do you have it on premises? Do you have it in the public cloud? Do you have it on some sort of hybrid thing? Do you run it on your phone? I don't know. You need to take it into consideration. And then you need to prompt it, right? You're not going to use the system-based prompt because you're too good for it. And you need to think about how your prompt is designed. We actually spend a lot of time at EIA designing our prompts and iterating them, and obviously this is a very iterative work. I've been very happy to see a lot of conversation designers here and AI developers at the conference. It's a pleasure to meet you. We do spend a lot of time in this circle at EIA, and it really shows a lot of success. And then obviously you need to take a look at your outputs. In our perspective, that looks like, what does the chatbot interaction look like with the customer? What does the customer experience look like? What is your end result? What are you gaining from your conversational AI interactions? And then you go into define. So for each of these categories, you look at potential risks. I'm not going to read all of them to you because you know them, you've heard them in these sessions, they've been very carefully presented to you. But at the model level, you think about hallucinations, you think about performance drift. At the provider level, you need to think about your downtime. And if you run large language model systems in the public cloud, you probably have encountered some sort of RPM or TPM limit that you may have hit at some point or another in the last 12 months. Your prompt can be injected, can be changed, can have vulnerabilities. Does it have vulnerabilities? Yes, it does. If you think it doesn't, check again. And your output, of course, can give out all sorts of information to the customers that you don't want out because AI is built to please its user, and you're the user, but also your customer is the user, so many people are the users, who do we please, right? It's a very confusing system, so the output can be just as confusing as in that situation. You have to be aware of all of these risks and then some, and you have to put them all on paper. You have to have them documented, and then after you have them all documented, I'll give you a quick little insight. You have to understand how you control them. So when I talk about this define, I'm going to go back for a second. I want to understand everything that can go wrong. And I put it there in what's the worst case scenario. I put it in there without any care, any controls. Then I implement a control. So let's look at something as easy as hallucinations. What's the simplest control for hallucinations? Guardrails. Of course it's guardrails. So we're going to constrain the scope via the prompt. We're going to use a RAG model for grounding. We're going to implement groundings. So that's our control right there and there. That is what I call, well, what people in risk call a preventative control. What does a preventative control mean? It makes sure that the risk doesn't happen. But can the risk still happen? Of course it can't. So you need a monitoring control, which means a control that tells you when it happens. So you grade your outputs, you flag low confidence responses, you have an observability system in place. Usually observability is the best monitoring control that tells you when things go wrong. And there's a final type of control, and that is the mitigative control. When fudge does hit the fan, what do you do? In typical risk frameworks, usually that's an insurance policy. But in AI, you have a human review, you can have a correction and retraction status. What happens if your chatbot gave information to your customers that you shouldn't have had? You get in touch with your customer, right? You do need to have all of these processes documented because that makes it easier for when it does happen. And then you're going to calculate everything that I've told you so far into a simple matrix. What you need to understand is the difference between likelihood and impact. And I'm going to give you a solid example from Yaya. Our chatbot. What's the likelihood of it releasing a hallucination? Well, we have guardrails in place. It checks itself on multiple levels. We have a lot of security. We have the public cloud native guardrails, input guardrails. We have output guardrails. It's still possible, right? Hallucinations sometimes still get out there. So we need to be very honest with ourselves, and it's something between a 3 and a 4. That scale is something that you can build for yourself depending on your appetite, but you need to be honest with yourself because only then will you understand what happens. Now, what types of hallucinations do we get out there? So at a 3 or 4 level, what's the impact? It's usually minor, right? It's about a 2 to a 3. But there are situations that you need to take into consideration where you get to a 5, a severe legal liability, business continuity risk. There have been cases, right? If you use LinkedIn, which I'm sure all of you do, you have seen cases of people using the Chipotle chatbot to run a Python Lambda. You've seen examples of people negotiating cars to $1, right? These can affect your reputation. These are severe risks. You need to keep them into account. And then you multiply the two, and you get a scale from, well, 1 to 25 for me. You can put a scale of 1 to 6 for each, whatever you want, and you define your own appetite. This is a neutral appetite. So for us in a finance-regulated environment, which we're much more stringent, right, with the risks that we accept and with the controls that we have in place. But basically, a 1 is something negligible. It's unlikely to happen. It doesn't have an impact. Let it be. But then you get to a 15, a 17. What do you do in that situation, right? It's acceptable, but what does acceptable mean? It means that somebody accepts the risk. They take the responsibility of that risk happening, and they say, I am the person, or I and my team are the people who sign off on this risk, and if things do go wrong, we're going to be the ones responsible for fixing it, and we're going to be the ones who are accountable for the consequences. And of course, based on your instinct or your appetite, there is a level that you must set as unacceptable, which means at this point, forget it. It's too risky. We're not going to take this risk for this level of innovation. If you're in finance, your unacceptable level is somewhere on here. If you're in a more innovative or less risky environment, you can push it a little bit more. I left it at 25 because it is completely up to you to decide. And then you escalate. You create a tier level of escalation because not everybody is responsible for everything, so you need to have a pyramid level. Now, this can look corporate and intimidating. It isn't, right? It can literally be multiple hats that you yourself wear, but you need to understand which level of kind of attention and alertness do you give to each risk. So at a team level, whether that team is 1 or 20, you want to look at operational alerts. What's happening? Are our systems timing out? Are we running out of quota? And then when your system fails, or when it's time for a review, you want to escalate that to a department level. In a startup environment, that might look at, let me tell my manager. Once your system reviews are in place, it starts to get interesting because executives will need to be involved generally when it comes to budgeting and strategy. When it comes to AI, that tends to be an interesting part, especially in non-tech specific environments. So for example, at EI Finance, we have a high level of stakeholder engagement from the executive level, and we do pay a lot of attention in having our executives trained in the technology. And that's really important, right? There might be cases where you need to articulate the technology a little bit better and a little bit more depth and more comprehensive reports to your executives because they're the ones who sign off on everything that you need. And the pricing models are completely new. The infrastructure is completely new. All of the things that you deal with might be completely novel to them as we've established. And then you'll likely have a board. They need to know of all of your high risks. So everything that might endanger your reputation, your legal liability, your very existence, they need to be transparently presented to the board. I have been talking to colleagues in the field, and there has been a level of fear in presenting these risks. It's still a very, I don't think there's any shame in admitting the fact that AI is a very volatile and plastic environment that catches shape with our usage. It's not defined, it's not an image that we know precisely everything about. So saying things could still go wrong despite all of these controls that we put in place because a new risk might appear tomorrow is the most honest thing you can do to yourself and to your team. And that has helped us really get a level of safety and get a level of comfort that allowed us to put things into production in front of our users in a highly regulated environment. So if you take this mentality and adapt it to your scale, then you'll have a much easier way innovating and taking conversational AIs to a much higher level and ultimately into production because you really want to leave the sandbox and put it in front of the users. And that was me in 15 minutes rather than 30. If you have any questions, shoot. And that's my LinkedIn, and that's my AI-generated headshot.